Very warm welcome to our respected Principal Sir Dr. S.P. Agarwal and to all the participants attending today's session. It's the fourth day into our Rendezvous series, country's biggest virtual conclave, and with each passing day, it's getting bigger and better. Very warm welcome to our respected Principal Sir Dr. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to our speaker for today. Our speaker was born in Bhilai, Chhattisgarh. He comes from a very humble background where his brother and he were the first people in his family to enter the portals of college. He certainly has come a long way. Currently, he serves as the 17th Chief Economic Advisor for the Government of India. He has also served as a member in the Expert Committee for Securities Exchange Board India and the Reserve Bank of India. He is a professor in the Indian School of Business and an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. The list goes on. Please welcome Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Sir, it is an honor for us to have you on board. Thank you so much for your time. It will be a pleasure for us to be enlightened by you. I'd request our principal, sir, to share his words of wisdom and address the gathering.
Thank you. Thank you. Our guest speaker today, Dr. KV Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. Basically, he is not only an engineer, management expert, and turned into economist, and studied at the best school in the world, we can say, one of the best school. And sir, this is a college basically governed by Delhi University, and we are a small institution, upcoming new institution established in 2012. About 3,000 students, mainly focuses mathematics, statistics, computer science, economics, management, and commerce. We have about 100 faculty members and about 100 sports staff. The college is located in South Delhi, and you can see the building in the background. It's a newly created entity. And besides being a passionate undergraduate college, we are into training program of teachers. We are one of the recognized centers from Ministry of Education, flagship scheme, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission for Teachers and Teaching. Under that scheme, we have already trained about 60,000 teachers from all over India, including from Chhattisgarh. And mainly our focus has been on online teaching, MOOCs, ICT, data analysis, research, and some subject-based programs. We are also very keen to do the overall development of our students. We keep on organizing different programs. We have one Center for Ethics and Values. We are very particular about that. And we have trained our students in such a manner that minimum difficulties we face from them. And I can tell you that we are an institution where most harmonious relations are there in Delhi University colleges. Well, sir, you are a economist, and you have been advising Government of India. We want to listen from you that post-COVID, what are your recommendations to government? And not only that, we would also because you have seen other crises also, like financial crisis of 89, 90. I was in US at that time, then crisis 2008-9, and this crisis. Now, the question is that the growth, the 5 trillion economy, and on the other hand, providing education, health, and shelter, home, clothing to the lowest section of the society, which is almost 50% in this country. Now, I'm sure you will throw more light on these things. And another important thing is that, the country has produced the best of the economists, not only the advisor to Government of India, but probably some of you must be advising the governments in US, UK, and other big countries. Now, we here want that these young talent which these institutions have. And since we are the students and faculty of the best university, at least in the country, so that they can also be trained or learn something from you for future direction. With this, once again, welcome on behalf of the college, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Over to you, sir.
Very good evening, Professor Agarwal and the esteemed faculty of the institution and my dear students. Let me first acknowledge my thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts. I will certainly speak on the economy. That's something which is I think, quite important. But I thought, let me, initially speak on what Professor Agarwal mentioned about, about in some way, your career aspirations, and as youngsters, what you would like to sort of pursue. So I have a few suggestions, and these are primarily based on my own experience. I'm not a career coach or anything like that, so I'll just say these based on my own experience. I think the first piece of advice that I would give you, given that you are at an age where your entire career, is ahead of you, and you have an enormous opportunity to contribute to the country and to the society. I think what is most important is, Professor Agarwal mentioned about ethics. And in that, I'm just reminded of, because he mentioned about ethics, a shloka from the Bhagavad Gita, which I think is really pertinent. This comes in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, shloka 21, which goes as Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha Tat Tad Evetaro Janaha Sayat Pramanam Kurute Lokas Tad Anuvartate. What it means is Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha. Sresht means, those that are looked up to, kids like you, from some of the best institutions in the country. Acharan is behavior. Yad yad acharati sreshtataha tat tad evetaro janaha. So janaha is basically those who look up to you. They look at the behavior of people like you. Sayat pramanam kurute. Praman is basically, as in Hindi as well, it's proof. Not just words, not just, but your deeds. Sayat pramanam kurute lokas tad anuvartate. I think this is, if you can just keep this one particular message, the fact that the way you behave is how others will, will behave by looking at you and drawing inspiration from you. Not just in terms of your words, but the way you actually behave. And that proof of behavior, that praman, is what guides you. I think that is the most important aspect to remember in terms of ethics, because oftentimes virtue is something that, while it can be enhanced by teaching, it is also something that each individual has to focus on, on his or her own life. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. While you will, as you will go through world, through your life, people will tell you how others are becoming successful by doing, hanky panky here, there, and which may give you, which may tempt you to actually go that route. I'll say it based on my own personal experience that it is not necessary to do hanky panky to be successful. You can follow the straight narrow path, work hard and do the right things, and yet be successful. I think that's something, and ethics is just about, it's as there are many other things in this world. Ethical behavior cannot be defined, but when you see ethical behavior, you know what is ethical and what is not. Similarly, unethical behavior, you may not be able to define it, but you can, sort of sense and perceive what is, ethical and unethical behavior. So that keep that moral compass alive within you. I think, I've seen oftentimes as you become older, for many people, cynicism takes over, and actually that ethical compass stops guiding you. I think that's something which I would say is, you should not let that happen to you. Let that ethical compass be as strong in you in your 40s and your 50s and even in your 30s, as it is in your, in your 20s. I think that is really what is most important, because then, you will actually make the right choices. Now, it's some more specific things. I think, in terms of what you want to do in your career, I'll say it in this very simple manner. If you draw a 2x2 matrix, on one dimension you have what you enjoy, and on the other dimension you have what you're good at. So just draw a 2x2 matrix. Am I good at this? Do I enjoy it? Yes, no, yes, no. Now, if you are doing something which you are good at and you enjoy, that's like the north east corner, northwest corner, sorry. I think then, you've hit gold dust. Just stay in that, and don't put the cart before the horse. If you are doing something that you're good at and, you enjoy, money, power, prestige, privilege, everything will come to you. Just do what if you do find what you enjoy and what you're good at, I think just stay there. But typically what happens is, for most people, it's a choice between, if you are in that cell, you will be among that minority, that privileged few who actually understand what to do in life. But for most people, it's a choice between actually doing something that they're good at, but don't enjoy, versus something that they are, that they enjoy, possibly not so good at this point in time. By the way, the last cell, which is, if you neither enjoy it nor do you, are you good at, just because it pays you some money, don't take that, because you'll be miserable all your life. I don't put the cart before your horse. So that cell, you should just basically throw it into the trash can. So this choice between these two, I would suggest that you should choose what you enjoy, because it's a very simple, if you do what you enjoy, you hit what I think about as a virtuous loop. Because you enjoy, you can work hard, and that's a credo that remains true across the board. One of my privileges has been to see the best people on this planet at close quarters, be it Nobel laureates, be it top policy makers. I've had the privilege to see them from close quarters, and let me tell you, no one has had success without working hard. I think that remains the most important credo. If you want to take shortcuts, the likelihood is that shortcut may take you to something else in Delhi, Tihar jail. So just keep that in mind. So when you do something that you enjoy, you can work hard, and because work does not really seem like work, you enjoy it, and then you can put in the hours, and when you put in the hours, you will become good at it as well. That's the virtuous loop. Because you work hard, you become good at it, and when you're good at it, you actually get personal satisfaction, and then that makes you work harder, you become better, and that's how you basically keep going, up and up and up. But the same thing, if you go on the other one, which is, if you don't enjoy it, you will find work to be a chore. You will not be able to work that hard. And if you don't work hard, you will not become good. I think that is something which is, so you will not get that satisfaction, and therefore, you'll get on the vicious loop. So, sum and substance, what I would say, therefore, is to do what you enjoy. Career choice is very much about understanding yourself very well. If you understand yourself, what makes you tick, what makes you, what gives you enjoyment, if you understand those, then you can make good career choices. And I think, most people find or forget something that is most fundamental, which is that humans do things finally for happiness. I think if you realize that very quickly, you can make really good choices in life, and thereby be be happy. The last piece of advice I basically give you is that if your only ambition in life is to be rich, it shows an extreme poverty of ambition. I think that's something which you should keep in mind. I mean, I hope you're getting the interplay of the words poverty and richness. Most people think about richness as only in terms of some pieces of paper or some numbers in a bank account. Life is far richer than that. And I'm not saying you should not basically live a good life. Of course, you should live a good life. Think about money as necessary, not as sufficient. And I'm sure all of you as mathematics and statistics statistics students, you understand the difference between necessary condition and sufficiency condition. Mathematics tells you that difference between necessary and sufficiency. Money is necessary, it's not sufficient. Look at the number of people who are really rich but are not happy. I think that should tell you that money is not a sufficiency condition for happiness. So these are my broad pieces of advice that I want to leave you. It's very tempting, especially with young people like you, to actually just at least among the group of, even if one person latches on to this advice and thereby make good choices, I think that would give me enormous satisfaction. I didn't want to miss that opportunity of sharing those perspectives. I think now let me stop on the economy. Let me start by first describing some of the key reforms that have happened in the last few months. I think these reforms are really seminal in the country's economic history. If in next year we will actually be completing 3 decades of economic liberalization. Incidentally, economic liberalization happened when I was in college. It happened in 1991. So those of you who are in college are actually getting to sort of see similar, another big set of reforms that have happened, things that we've been talking about for the last 3 decades. Some of them even for more than that, since independence, have happened now. And so these are very important. Before I describe, what these reforms are and what is the import of these reforms, what I would definitely mention is that if you go and look, read the newspapers or the media, in 1991, you will find very few articles at that time in 1991 appreciating what was being done. Only those people who actually were really doing it, and in particular the then Prime Minister, P.V. Narasimha Rao, and the Finance Minister then, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and a few others basically who were helping, understood the import of what was being done. You will not find too many articles at that time which said, oh, this is historical, these reforms are historical. Now, of course, history looks back at that and says that was a seminal moment, in the economic history of this country, especially given the socialistic past that we had inherited. Now, I would actually think that we are similarly, we are in a similar period of time. Though I must say, given the experience that has, that we've seen in the last 30 years, there are at least some people who are writing saying these are very important reforms, and they are, those that are outside government, some of them, outside government, are also recognizing the import of these reforms. But overall, most people tend to be focusing on just the short term, and thereby, are not seeing the full, impact that these reforms will bring. What are these? So let me, with that particular caveat, let me talk about what are these reforms, and what's the underlying principle behind, these reforms. So in order to actually explain the principles behind these reforms, I think it's important to understand India's economic history. And when I say India's economic history, I am not talking about, the last 70 odd years since independence. India, as you know, is a very, very old culture. And literature, when you talk about literature in the Indian context, it is not just, or on the economic context, it's not just what Adam Smith wrote or what John Maynard Keynes wrote. I've had the privilege of going and reading some of the oldest, scriptures. For instance, Arthashastra and Tirukkural. I come from the south. My mother tongue is Tamil, and one of the seminal pieces of literature in the south is written by Saint Tiruvalluvar, which is called Tirukkural. If you go and read these, you wouldn't find any mathematical models, like you might find in some of the current economic papers. But the important ideas relating to economics were talked about at that point in time. For instance, the importance of trade, the importance of enabling markets, the importance of trust. These were actually talked about then as well. So, and if you look at the economic history, George Madison, who not George Madison, Angus Madison, for my apologies. Angus Madison actually has done this work where he went and looked at the last 2000 years of the world's economic history. And what he found was that almost till 1750 AD, so which means for 3/4 of India, of world's economic history, India occupied the pole position in the world economy. We contributed more than 1/3 of world's GDP. Now, for almost 17 and a half centuries, to actually be at the pole position and contributing more than 1/3 of the world's GDP, what today United States is, doing that for 17 and a half centuries. The United States has not been in that pole position for even 1 century yet. So just imagine how big and important that performance was. Now that kind of dominance does not happen by accident. It happened by pursuing some very important economic principles, which is what has been elucidated in these scriptures. So when you go back and look at that history, what you find is, except for a short period during the British rule, when they really undermined Indian economy, they basically undermined markets, and they basically exported prosperity to their native land. And during the period of socialism, 4.5 decades of socialism, India basically got away from these timeless principles of enabling the invisible hand of markets, what Adam Smith basically said, the invisible hand of markets. Without using that particular jargon, in India, we had actually respected that and we had actually followed that, and that's what led to that economic prosperity. So now when you see it, since 1991, what has been done in India, governments across the political spectrum, except for some years, have actually pursued these principles, by liberalizing the economy, by undertaking reforms, and the prosperity that has come about during this period. Look at, for instance, our GDP, how it has grown multiple times, is evidence that these timeless economic principles actually do deliver prosperity. And I think empirical evidence is the best way to look at it. The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So if you look at the reforms that are being done now, these are they're recognizing that that markets actually are the ones that really deliver prosperity. And Adam Smith said it this way, that the reason we have bread in the morning, or rotis, or rice in the morning, is not because of the of the largesse or the generosity of the producer, but because the market basically works through prices, and he does it for his profit. And that's how the person's self-interest gets aligned with what is good for society as a whole. And that's what across society, across history, it's been seen that it is really markets, well-regulated markets, not the rule of jungle, but well-regulated markets deliver enormous prosperity. It's the fact that in India many people oftentimes remain suspicious of markets is because of our history. Since 1947, a lot of socialism and socialistic thought has actually permeated a lot of. But when you look at our larger history and actually go and read the the written word, scriptures and basically literature is not just what is written in the last 100 years. It is anything that is written in human history. So when you go and read that, you find that these timeless principles have actually been advocated and have been really beneficial in delivering prosperity. So that's what these current reforms do, which is they enable markets, they give space to the private sector, because private sector is far more efficient, and they basically reduce state intervention in the economy, as the Honorable Prime Minister has always said, that that government does not have that much of business being in business. It should be the private sector that should really be. Now, some people do look at private sector or say they make profits. Profits are fine. Profiteering is not okay, and that's where regulation comes in. And as long as you have well-regulated markets, competitive markets, that delivers prosperity. And I think the illustration of this is, take the agricultural reforms that have happened. The Farm Bill, for instance. Some of the opposition on this is grossly misinformed, in my opinion, because if you look at any other producer, take a producer of shampoo or a producer of television or a producer of let's say garments in this country, these producers can go and sell their produce wherever they want, but the Indian farmer did not have that freedom. The Indian farmer, he's also a producer. He's a producer of rice, wheat, tomatoes, potatoes, etc. The way the regulation used to be, that the Indian farmer could go and sell his produce only in his local mandi. And that's what regulation basically said, that you cannot go and sell it anywhere else. So he did not have the freedom to go and sell anywhere else and thereby get a better price for his produce. And you must have seen it yourself. When you go to buy something, when you bargain, if the seller knows that you need not buy it from him, you can say कि भैया यदि आप नहीं बेचोगे तो मैं किसी और से खरीद लूंगा या खरीद लूंगी. That actually makes the seller actually bargain and give you a better price, and that's just not just common sense but good economics as well. And that's what has been done through these farm bills, to basically give the freedom to the farmer to say, I can, of course, if I want to, go and sell to the local mandi, but I can also go and sell it to maybe an ITC or a Reliance, and there are many of these producers who can compete with each other. So that option is what gives the farmer better price. And data shows, for instance, small and marginal farmers in India, they're actually generating such small part of the surplus. When in any relationship there's a surplus that is generated, the intermediary and the buyers were cornering almost 97% of the surplus, with a small farmer getting only about 3%. Imagine, actually, of the 100 bucks that is getting value added, the small farmer gets only $3. And why? Because he was beholden to the intermediary, to the local mandi. And this is an example of enabling markets and thereby generating prosperity, something that actually I mentioned, has been advocated in our scriptures, from 2000 years back, even longer. And that's what actually we implemented, generate prosperity, and thereby become, remain in the pole position of contributing to 1/3 of global GDP for 3/4 of known economic history. And so that's what we are implementing. Of course, the effect of some of this will not come immediately. It will take maybe 6 months to a year for some of these to happen, because in any economy, the measures that are taken, such effects actually slowly and gradually build up. That's one. The second piece of reform are these labor reforms. The fact that many firms which could basically not hire enough people because if they hired, and suppose there was a demand shock, they couldn't actually, reduce the employment, and that made them very, very reluctant to hire, and thereby affected employment. Now, and that's something which is, now the labor law reforms provide them that flexibility. Again, thereby enable the labor market to function more efficiently. Similarly, if you look at the agenda on privatization, the government has announced that it will actually privatize, all the entities that are outside of strategic sectors, a few sectors that are actually considered strategic. Outside of that, all others, actually the government will basically privatize and thereby enable efficiency. Another set of important reforms is the way the MSMEs are defined. One of the problems in the Indian setting has been that as MSMEs remain very small, because many of the incentives that are provided to MSMEs, are provided when they remain below a certain threshold. So the MSME, in order to continue availing the benefit, chooses to remain small, and thereby we had the problem of dwarfs, which is that the firm basically aged, became 30-year-old, 40-year-old, but continued to remain small. And instead what we want is children that grow to become giants. And the MSME definitions now enable that growth. Similarly, the opening up of opportunities for the private sector in the in defense, in mining, and several other areas. So these are all very important pieces of reforms that will really enhance productivity in the Indian economy. Now, so as a result, the medium to long term, I think for the Indian economy has been taken care of very well. What we need to do now in the short run is to ensure that we basically have demand coming back in the economy, and I think it is already happening. You must have seen some of the high frequency indicators. Manufacturing, for instance, the sector has come back to not only pre-COVID levels, but also to levels similar to last year, same point in time. So the unlock phase has really enabled in bringing back that vitality to the manufacturing sector. Some of the services sectors where social distancing still remains important, there the growth actually, it's still not come back to the pre-COVID levels. But I think that is something which once the vaccine comes back and some of the unlocks that are being, some of the relaxations that are happening now will enable these to basically come back. So many of the high frequency indicators, I'm not going to go into the details, but I've written about this elsewhere that you can check. So overall, I think we basically need to focus on the short run for now, to ensure that productive capacity is kept as unaffected as possible. Thereby, we can reap the benefits from the significant reforms that have been implemented. So overall, I think if you look at the prospects for the Indian economy going forward, look very good, and I'm very, very optimistic going forward. So I'll stop here, and actually I think it's be a good opportunity to hear you all your questions, and I'm sure that there'll be many questions which I can take.
Indeed, an informative and insightful session, sir. We have a bunch of questions. Let's get into it. So my first question is, could you shed some light on the terms like pandemic bonds and sustainably linked bonds, and how do they work?
Pandemic bonds are basically, what is a bond? A bond is just, it's a loan, and a bond is typically traded in markets. A loan, for instance, if you go and if you take a loan from a bank, that loan you actually, you can repay it after 5 years, let's say, but that loan is not traded in a market. But if it's a corporate bond, for instance, if let's say a company issues a corporate bond, that bond is, it can be traded in the markets. In other words, if I hold the bond today, I can sell it to you in the market. That's what a bond is. So a pandemic bond is basically a bond that is issued, to raise resources during a pandemic.
And so my next question is, what according to you is the biggest misconception or misassumption people have regarding the economy in these current times?
I think there are several. I'll focus on two of them. Firstly, the fact that the economy is indeed recovering well is something that I think people should understand. They should look at the data very carefully. My office, for instance, tracks close to 58, about 58 high frequency indicators, and we track that on a weekly basis to see how the economy is doing. So I think one of the most important misconceptions that I want to remove is relating to the economy. In the unlock phase, the manufacturing sector in particular is growing very well. I'll just give you a couple of high frequency indicators. If you look at, for instance, what is called the Purchasing Managers Index, it's the PMI. So PMI is measured for manufacturing and for services. PMI is an indicator of, so what they do is they actually survey purchasing managers who are going to do purchases, and they ask them saying, do you think that you're going to purchase more, or less? So in other words, and that captures therefore whether the economy is going to expand or is it going to contract. So if that index is greater than 50, what that means is that more than 50% of people think that they actually, the economy is going to expand. If it is less than 50, then it basically suggests that people in general think, purchasing managers are thinking that the economy is going to contract, or that particular sector of the economy is going to contract. Now, if you look at the manufacturing PMI, in the month of August, in the month of September, the PMI for manufacturing has now reached 56.8. And this is, it's for manufacturing, it's almost at a 7-year high. In other words, for the first time in 7 years, the manufacturing PMI has reached this high level. What does that tell you? Almost 60% of purchasing managers in the manufacturing sector, in other words, those that purchase stuff from the manufacturing sector, believe that the manufacturing sector is going to expand. So, and that's a very, very good sign. If you look at the services sector, as I said earlier also, the service sector, because it is, affected more by social distancing, like travel, tourism, hotels, etc. Those are affected by social distancing. But even there, the PMI now in the month of September is 49.8. So almost 50, which means, 50-50. Half people think, how the people think that it's actually going to expand, half the people think it's basically going to, sort of contract. So which means it actually is almost at sort of the same, level. So I think overall, the biggest misconception that I want to actually remove is that that the economy, is not basically, is not back to pre-COVID levels. The second misconception I think is important is, so people basically, for instance, say, oh, what was the impact of the lockdown, for instance? Why did we have such an intense lockdown in India? I think this is something where, what is really important to understand is that, decisions, by policymakers have to be made with foresight and have to be made amidst a lot of uncertainty. Okay. So think about this, because when the decision was taken in March, this was so about mid-March, we were seeing that a lot of countries, the cases were really going up. And basically the data also showed that lockdown in Wuhan, for instance, had really helped in bringing down cases. Now think about India. India actually almost 1.4 billion population, 140 crores, right? Such a large population. And a pandemic always, the pace of spread of a pandemic depends on the network effect. For instance, if it's a larger network, the pace can be very fast. It's like, network effects in digital economies. Similarly, the pandemic also spreads, much faster in a larger network. In other words, if you take a group of, let's say, 100 people versus a group of 1,000 people, in the group of 1,000 people, the spread actually may be far higher. The pace of spread may be far higher than in the group of 100 people. That's just because of the network effects, because one person actually infecting two, let's say, in a 1,000 group, can then infect many more, and so it can grow exponentially. Now, when you took that into account for India, number one. Secondly, also take into account that India in particular actually, if you look at the population density, in other words, the number of people that live in 1 square kilometer, for instance, it's among the highest in the world. And why is this important? Because this affects actually also the pace of spread. Because if people are closer to each other, especially those at the bottom of the pyramid, then they are likely to infect. So these are two important aspects that we needed to take into account. A third part that was really crucial is that now, it's about actually what should you sort of focus on, because when faced with a pandemic, the choice is as follows. If you don't do a lockdown and let's say lots of people get affected, then what happens is you don't get the time to ramp up your health infrastructure, your testing infrastructure, and doctors also, don't have enough time to learn how to treat COVID. So what can happen is that the mortality rates can be very large. And just to give you data, for instance, in the month of April, the mortality rate in India was about 4.4%. Now, the mortality rate is about 1.2, 1.3%. Why? Because doctors also have learned how to actually deal with, they've gone up the learning curve. Now, imagine, suppose we did not have an intense lockdown and we had, let's say, 60, 70,000 cases in the month of April, which for a population of 140 crores is very easy. And if you had, and suppose the testing infrastructure did not ramp up, the health infrastructure did not ramp up, what would have happened is, because the testing infrastructure does not ramp up, you would have lots of people who may be asymptomatic, but who may be spreading, and therefore the pandemic would spread very, very fast. And so, because if you can't test, you can't quarantine, and that's number one. Number two, if your health infrastructure has not ramped up, you don't have PPEs, all the doctors, nurses, and all the healthcare workers. If you don't have actually enough oxygen masks, ventilators, etc., mortality rates would have been far higher. Much more than even 4% that we had at that time, 6, 7%. So if you have about 60, 70,000 cases with a mortality rate of 6, 7%, you can then do the arithmetic that we would have been looking at about 3,000 to 4,000 deaths every day, in the month of April itself. So what the lockdown actually did was to really push that curve, about for 2-3 months by locking down and thereby reducing the contact among people. We got time to actually ramp up the testing infrastructure, thereby the ability to quarantine people and therefore, halt the spread of the pandemic, and also create the health infrastructure so that you could actually, keep mortality rates really low. And the evidence of that is actually seen in the data. If you look at, mortality on per lakh basis for India, vis-a-vis, let's say, Brazil, United States, any European country, our mortality rates are about 1/10 to 1/12 of what is there in Brazil, United States, Europe, etc. So this is something which is very important to keep in mind. When faced with a pandemic, policymakers have to make this choice between bad and worse. Because when you lock down, you will have economic impacts. You have to, but what we chose is a humane strategy. That, even if, let's say, GDP growth goes down, GDP growth will come back, but human lives that are lost cannot be brought back. And in a country like India, where typically one bread earner supports a family of 5 people, now who is most susceptible to to actually, to Corona. It's a bread earner because he has to go and work, right? And so if that bread earner actually dies, then, four other people can go destitute. Now, undeniably, because of the GDP decline, it's possible this particular family or families like that would have gotten impacted. But, again, that's a choice between bad versus the worst outcome of that bread earner, dying, and therefore four other people becoming destitute and large number of people becoming destitute. So these are the kind of choices that we have to make. And what is important, therefore, especially for youngsters like you, is to ask the question, what if, not just look at the data. What if we did not have this kind of intense lockdown, in the country? What would have been and that's something which, you will never get to see, because that is, of course, something that you can actually, you can estimate, but in the, you only see one pattern of behavior, which is actually that we did lockdown, and this is the number of cases. But it's really important to keep that in mind. I think that is the other misconception, that you have to compare to other countries. With our population, we've done far better. Just to, I think, and I'll just end by using this parallel. Take the state of Gujarat, for instance. Just the state of Gujarat has the same population as United Kingdom. Look at the number of cases and deaths in United Kingdom and compare it to Gujarat. Then you do an apples to apples comparison, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Okay. Well, I would like to intervene here. The first part of your deliberation was indeed very important for our students, learners. You said that you must do those things only where you enjoy the most. Here also, they will enjoy the most when they are totally focused. So when people are fully aligned with the object, okay, the trinity matches the object, the purpose, and everything, then they develop, joy in that particular aspect. So how to get maximum joy in a particular work, particular task that is given, there also one has to focus that is one devoting half attention or full attention to a particular thing. Now the second part, highly informative indeed for students about the economy. Well, we all know that Mahatma Gandhi, his approach towards freedom movement was values driven. Values driven. Now I would like some fundamental things from you. You are at the helm of affairs. That towards the developmental goals, do we have that kind of vision? Because we would like to know that what kind of economy are you thinking to prepare? That will give a proper orientation to our students, that they must prepare themselves for that kind of economy, and also whether there is enough scope for ethics and values, as our principal has pointed out, whether we are going to implement those policies, giving due importance to all those things, because as Mahatma Gandhi said, that if your means are wrong, then your means will have impact on the end that you will achieve. So these are the things very important. And as you said, you should enjoy your work. Okay, that reflects by your face that you are really enjoying your work, and that is why you are doing justice to your work. And you have come out with, a clear picture about what you are doing. And I'm really thankful to my students. I would like to congratulate them for having sought your participation in this webinar. This is a great thing, and that is how they should be encouraged to move upwards. So that was my observation. So on the vision aspect, on the means aspect, can you throw some light on that?
Very long question. So let me summarize what I think there were two parts to your question. One is how does one enjoy? I mean, as a student, how does one enjoy what one does? And second is about the vision for the economy, and especially focus on means and ends. So firstly, I think the first part of your question I already answered it, but let me say it again. Um, Given that the students are at a stage where they can still make the choice, many students may basically make this choice saying, okay, let me go and take the job that is paying me the most. What I'm trying to say is that's not the way to actually make your choices. This is the time when you should really focus on understanding two things. And as I said earlier as well, good career choice is about understanding yourself well, and understanding that eventually all of us do things in our life to be happy. I will say again, all of this is based on my own experience. It helped me that at a very young age I understood that that I want to do things that will make me happy, and that's why I pursued what I ended up pursuing. Of course, no, undeniably there's a lot of luck involved in one's choices as well. But I think if you are clear about what you want to do, I think that helps a lot. And there, as I said again, I'll reiterate, you should really understand what is it that you enjoy and what is it that you're good at. These two questions you should really focus and ask yourself, so that you can make that choice and and choose a career where you do what you're enjoying and you're reasonably good at as well. Now, some of you, despite that, it's possible that you may end up doing something that you are, let's say, not enjoying as much. There, I think, in order to enjoy it is also important to be good at what you're doing. And I think by far the most important aspect that has helped me is focus. It's something that I'm sure all of you would have heard about Arjuna, the warrior, who was able to hit that fish's eye only because of that unwavering focus, that laser-like focus that he had. Now, for you all, actually, there is a very, very large temptation to multitask. While you're studying, basically go on WhatsApp, while you're, go and check your Facebook, go and check Instagram, maybe go on your Twitter account. Now, that is the easiest way to actually, to be unproductive and at the same time not enjoy what you're doing. Because the easiest way to not be focused is to multitask. What you should do is, whatever time period that you want to actually choose, if you're studying, for instance, half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour, when you are studying, make sure, or you're doing your work, for instance, no social media, no WhatsApp, nothing. And that's something which helps me a lot, in remaining focused. As a result, what happens is, firstly, when you're distracted, when you're doing something in a distracted manner, I can assure you, you're not going to enjoy that for sure. And when you are distracted, you're not productive either. You'll find that there are some people who, for instance, study maybe for 3-4 hours, but end up, achieving far better scores than others who keep sitting for 10-12 hours, because the person who may be sitting for 10-12 hours, maybe actually his productive time is far less. I think, focus is extremely important, because focused activity makes you productive, makes you also actually enjoy that particular, activity. So I think this is something which is really important. Another aspect that I must mention in the context of social media, if you ask yourself, if you look at your Instagram pictures, would you go and post an Instagram picture, of, suppose you on a particular day, you're not having a good day, you're feeling down, maybe you're feeling tired, or something is bothering you, do you take that picture and go and put it out there saying, hey, today is not a good day for me? Do you go and post that? No, you go and post a picture on Instagram or Facebook when you have a party, or when you actually, only when you have, something good. And think about it, actually, life can never be about only good things. I know every person on this planet, has to face the sine curve or the cosine curve of life. Sine curve of life is basically that there will be peaks and there will be troughs. What we end up doing by actually focusing on Instagram is because, when that person is posting, what is he doing? He's basically applying the mod function on the sine curve, right? I'm sure all of you are basically engineers, you'll understand. What is he doing? He's basically cutting out all the negatives. He's basically the days when he or she, when he's having a bad day, he or she is not posting that. So what is getting posted on the social media is just the mod of sin x. And if you look at mod of sin x and you actually then say, hey, look at everybody else seems to be having great fun. I'm the only one who's basically facing the entire sin x. Everybody else is living life as mod of sin x. Actually, the fact is everybody just basically faces entire sine curve. If you are not wise enough, and if you don't keep this in mind, you will make the mistake of thinking that, oh, everybody else is living mod sin x. I'm the only one who's actually having to live sin x. So, and that makes you unhappy, can make you jealous or whatever, all those negative emotions. So this is something which is very important to keep in mind, as it's related to your happiness and enjoying what you do. I think those are the two key, to summarize, I think focused activity, and second, make sure you basically, take into account the filtering that happens in social media and what you see. So for instance, I'm not going to go and post a picture of me when I'm, let's say, in my shorts, doing yoga, for instance, right? I'm not going to go and post that, sweaty me or whatever. I'm going to go and post a good picture. Now, if somebody basically goes and looks at that picture and says, hey, he's always having a great time, maybe that person also needs to remember that it's not that easy to be, be responsible for the economy when we're having a pandemic like this. But that person will not get to see it and thereby think, oh, if this person is having a gala time. I think that sort of illustrates the ills of social media that you must, keep in mind. Now let me come to the, I think the other part of the question that that was asked by Professor Mishra, I presume. So the vision that, and I actually spent a lot of time on articulating this vision by talking about our scriptures, about Arthashastra, about Tirukural, and not just that. In fact, if you go and read even the Bhagavad Gita has important aspects relating to, some of these values that, that are being talked about. And one of the unfortunate things I find is that, India is a land that has so much wealth of knowledge on how to live life king size. And when I say live life king size, I'm not talking about basically going on a cruise or, some of that. Some are basically that visible consumption or, opulent consumption. That's not what living life king size is about. Living life king size is about living it in a way that, not being stressed, day to day, actually living in a relaxed manner, enjoying what you do, getting the full juice of life. That is what living life king size is all about. And if there is one country which has actually done the most research on how to live life king size, it is India. And that's where, so much has been written on this. And, unfortunately, many of us do not basically go and even just get a taste of that honey, that, that honey nectar, whatever you can call it, actually. I mean, you can go and keep drinking from that ocean of knowledge. Many people from other countries do that, but being here in India, we basically don't go and understand the benefits of some of that. The reason I'm saying this is because when you go and actually understand some of that wisdom, what it emphasizes is that the means are as important as the ends. And that's for the philosophy that whether it's a philosophy of karma, that is advocated, that at each individual level the means are as important as the end. I'll give you a very specific example of how we don't end up following. In every religion in India, and I'm going to take a couple of examples. In the Hindu religion, there is something called the doctrine of pious obligation. You know what that doctrine of pious obligation is all about? It is that if suppose a parent dies with some debt, your father or your mother dies with some debt, the doctrine of pious obligation says that it is actually beholden on the offspring to take care of that debt. That is the doctrine of pious obligation. Now this is in Hinduism. In Islam as well. I don't know how many of you have had this opportunity, but when a person passes away in a Muslim person somebody following Islam passes away, before what is called janaza, right, the last journey of that person, they will come with actually a basket of notes to everybody who's come to basically to that last journey, saying if this person took some debt, इन्होंने यदि उधार लिया हो आपसे तो अभी आप ले लीजिए, you take so that his last journey can be without any debt, and this is the kind of basically ethics and the kind of ethos that has been talked about in the Indian context. Now take that and contrast it to willful defaults that are done by many of our corporates. Dirty dozen, for instance. Our wisdom is talking about actually saying, if you have debt, your parent has debt, please repay it, because that's what that is what is beholden on you. And yet you have people who actually take money from others and don't repay intentionally, willful default, and that illustrates how actually the wedge that has come between the means and the ends. So what we actually have talked about, and those of you who are interested, please, I would recommend go and reading the first chapter of this year's economic survey, where the vision we've articulated is of ethical wealth creation. Not just wealth creation, but ethical wealth creation. And how? By marrying two things. One, the invisible hand of markets, as I said, something that India has done all the time. But also second, the marrying it with the hand of trust as a public good, transparency, trust, and that is what is what is recommended. For instance, if you go and read the Tirukkural, Tirukkural talks about actually definitely make money, and in fact it says there is no better way to puncture the pride of your enemy than to become wealthy. So do become wealthy. But what the Tirukkural also says is, but become wealthy not by harming anyone else. You become wealthy by helping others, not by harming someone else. And this sort of brings under its ambit climate change, that don't basically make profits by polluting the environment, don't make profits by basically taking money from others and not repaying. All these are captured in that. And that is what is the vision that our spiritual ethos, our metaphysical and other even religious traditions and cultures actually really advocate. So the vision that India must be focusing on is very much consistent with what Mahatma Gandhi ji actually talked about, which is ethics is extremely important, not just wealth creation, ethical wealth creation. And I take an example, take microfinance for instance. I had the opportunity, I had the privilege of being on the board of Bandhan Bank. That's a very good example of actually, making some profits while helping someone else. These are basically, you give loans to people who actually, otherwise would go and get loan from a money lender, local money lender. And you know how the local money lender will give a loan? He would basically give a 100 rupee loan, right? 100 rupee in his notebook, but actually will give only 90 rupees because he's kept the 10 rupee interest upfront. Where a bank, basically, when you borrow from a bank, you pay the interest at the end of the loan, not at the beginning. And this 10 rupee will be for a 1 month loan, right? So 10% for a month, you do the compounding, for over a 12-month period, you can then calculate that this is equivalent to almost like, 150, 200% rate of interest. So when you actually give a loan to someone who will be borrowing at 150, 200% rate of interest, now, even if you are actually giving it at 15, 18% rate of interest, and that's only because the transaction costs of that loan, of a smaller loan, have to be spread on a smaller denominator. And even if you're giving it at 15, 16%, you are really helping him, and at the same time also making some profits, which you can plow it back into the business and then give, credit to more people. This is a good example of actually doing good and at the same time also actually generating wealth. I think there are enough business models out there which can really be followed, where you do good and at the same time also actually make money. Take organic farming, for instance, or organic food. You grow organic food that is healthy for people. There are people who actually can pay, who want to live, don't want to eat stuff with pesticides and other stuff. That's another business of doing good and at the same time also making money. So the vision that that I have tried to articulate, and this is because of my own upbringing and actually somebody who has always valued ethics and values enormously in my own life, is of ethical wealth creation. Nothing upsets me more than finding somebody who makes money in a crooked way. Ethical wealth creation, and that's as they say in Hindi, isme sab samaj aata hai actually, means the ends, and making sure climate change is business basically does not accelerate climate change, pollution, all that comes in ethical wealth creation. That's the vision that basically I have in mind and that I've helped to articulate, and of course I must actually thank that some of the powers that we have actually received it very well.
Welcome, sir. Do you mind if I intervene?
Yeah, go ahead.
Pleasant evening, sir. It's an honor to have you on board. It's an honor to share the virtual floor with you. It's an honor that you accepted our invitation. But a few inferences that I draw from what you shed light on the previous part of your speech, that a lot of policies attract a lot of aversion and antimony in abundance, drawing a parallel with 1991 when liberalization was blatantly abjured in newspapers and daily articles. So do you think the onus on the government organizations, the onus on the people who direct policies, isn't the onus on them to clarify among the masses if a policy is righteous or not, and if a policy is befitting? Because the opposition, on the other hand, always raises campaigns like the prime minister is selling the country. All of this is going on. So what do you think? Isn't the onus on you to clarify the policies in a country where the enrollment ratio is 25%, but the literacy is very less? Yes, sir.
I think that's a very good question. So here's the, and some of us have tried to do this. For instance, yesterday there was a piece that came of my, of mine in the Times of India on the Farm Bill, for instance. See, there are two parts to, and you have to understand this well. When you think about the political economy of reform in India, and I think the agriculture bill, for instance, or the farm bill is a good example. Even the bankruptcy law, bankruptcy code, for instance, is also another very good example, which is that kind of reform hurts typically a small minority, but that a minority that is very vocal, has basically because it has actually benefited from the current status quo. They're typically wealthier, they typically and therefore actually have the ears of the powers that be, etc. So typically those that lose out from the reform are first they're vested, they have vested interests, and they are a vocal minority, number one. In contrast, those that get benefits are people like you and me, normal people like you and me, and these are people who typically do not have as much of a voice, and they're not typically as so rich or wealthy. They're part of a silent majority. That's number one, point number one. Second, part is, and I'll use the liberalization itself. Liberalization happened in 1991. Now, did the benefits come immediately? No. The benefits actually took 2-3 years to percolate. So, when you try to what you are basically having to say is that, this is good reform for you, for the silent majority, that will come, in a year's time, in 2 years' time. And that's what makes it difficult, because most people think, abhi mera kya hai? Isme mera aaj ke taarikh mein kya mil raha hai mujhe? People oftentimes don't have that long run vision, right? In contrast, those that are losing out, they know very well that aaj ke taarikh mein mera actually, mera dhanda pani band hone wala hai shayad. Okay, so it's the immediacy of the cost to those that are in the vested interest, and the fact that they are actually a vocal minority. In contrast, the benefit actually accrues over time and not, takes some bit of time, and they're usually a silent majority. This is why it actually requires enormous political conviction to actually do reform. It requires the courage of conviction that this is indeed good, and something that people will see the benefits. Look at how poverty actually has decreased since liberalization. Compared to the first 40-50 years, look at how our GDP per capita has increased. It's just for instance, I'll say on my own experience, right? Having done a PhD in the United States and actually always wanted to be a researcher, but for liberalization and but for an institution like the Indian School of Business, which got created only because of liberalization. I can bet by my entire stake saying that in a socialistic India, if we had continued the same thing, an institution like the Indian School of Business would not have come about. And then I would have had to forcibly live in the United States because I value research. I wouldn't have been able to come back to India and do what I really enjoy. So these kind of benefits accrued over time, and that's why, for instance, I feel that sort of connect to contribute back, because for me being able to do something that I enjoy actually happened because of of following good policies, and so that difficulty comes from the combination of these two things, that benefits accrue over time and benefits accrue to people who are a silent majority. That's why it is actually far more difficult. I agree with you that we have to communicate, but even when you communicate, you will find people saying, for instance, actually, just to take an example, I tweeted the article. One person actually tweeted, I mean, of course, it's expected that some abuse will happen. No, the one person said, "You lie so beautifully," was the tweet that the person basically said. And that's par for the course. That's. But one thing I actually pride myself on is I don't lie. I generally pride myself on my values, but that just exemplifies the kind of perception. Despite me making that point, actually the person, why is he saying that? Possibly because he's not seen the benefits yet. Maybe 1 or 2 years later, he may see benefits, but it's also possible that he may basically see benefits, and that's the other thing, right? Which is that he may not attribute it completely to the farm reforms. He may think, mera mehnat hai, I have done it, and not really attribute. These are all practical aspects that one has to keep in mind, which is why it's not that easy to do reforms. And that's why I really appreciate the political establishment for showing that courage of conviction to do reforms, because it's easy for people like me to actually say that this is what has to be done, and across 30 years people have been saying it, so I'm not going to take credit for that. The credit for it should go to the political establishment, and I'm not saying this to please anybody. That is the truth.
Just a follow-up question, sir. So you shed light on the vision with on things on which you try to bring up the economy. So do you think no matter how immaculate your vision of bringing up an economy is, it gets compromised due to the political differences which arise every 5 years? Like you, pursue certain plans, certain policies, but politics and economics go hand in hand. So right after 5 years, the vision changes, no matter how immaculate or ambitious it is, all of it comes down. So what do you have to say on that, sir?
See, this is, I think, one thing that everybody needs to understand very well is that capitalism and democracy are not perfect, but everything else, every other system is far, far worse. Just imagine living in a country where you don't have, and I can say it from experience actually, where in an autocracy, for instance, without human rights, without, so, and also remember that elections are a necessary part of a democracy, because it gives you the choice to exercise. And, for instance, look at the change in governments. Governments don't perform. They do basically go back, sometimes even after performing, they actually don't get re-elected. So it is an inevitable and an important part of a democracy. And, if I have to live my life again, I would say I would still want to live in a democracy. I don't want that 12% growth of an autocracy where, if I might get COVID and basically I might be just picked up and put somewhere, no human rights for me. I don't want to be living in that. So those elections after 5 years are extremely important, and that is what really, that's what a democracy is about. So make no mistake that, this idea of basically a dictatorship or an autocracy, I think it doesn't work. It doesn't. It's a benevolent autocracy is an oxymoron. It never happens. So, capitalism and democracy are not perfect. Much like, is any human being perfect? Ask yourself, are you perfect? I don't think I'm perfect. If and a society is made by humans. So if we humans ourselves are not perfect, then the systems that we'll create will not be perfect either. But everything else, apart from capitalism and democracy, is far, far worse.
Hello. Sir, I have a question here.
Last question. I have actually, I think, already exceeded 15 minutes.
Sir, my question is, we have historically seen that great classical laissez-faire state have turned towards the idea of big government, what we saw in the context of United States. So the question here is that how to means there is a book by Thomas Piketty, Capital in 21st Century, and that book is basically literature review of developed and developing economies. And according to the interpretation of the arguments advanced by Thomas Piketty, that although it's true that liberalization or globalization has done marvelous thing in uplifting the poor or means the trickling down of the surplus to the masses, but the point is, what is the point of balance? Since we have been seeing in our economy that we are a great paradox. On the one hand, we are bringing extremely neoliberal policies like FDI by the same government, and the same government is also bringing extremely welfareist policy like Manrega. I'm talking about UPA. So the point is about balance. So if we think that liberalization, privatization, and globalization is actually doing wonders for Indian economy, so how far that benefit will accrue towards masses? Because the rising inequality, we have seen by this Thomas Piketty's literature that there is a growing inequality. If we see the wealth with top 1% of people is far more greater than the wealth of bottom 50%. So here is the balance, that how to make this economic system for poor people. So my question is to you, sir, that being chief economic advisor to the present government of India. So how do you see that? Where is the balance? Where is the harmony between neoliberalism and welfarist policy of this current regime?
So firstly, let me be very, very clear. I am not, wedded to any school of thought. I look at evidence, and one of my strengths is that I am extremely open-minded. For instance, I never use the word globalization. I only, talked about reforms and liberalization. The other point is, I have of course read Thomas Piketty. Let me give you a broader first point. See, Thomas Piketty, like some of us, is an economist. What I am saying, you shouldn't take it as basically something coming from the Bhagavad Gita or the Holy Bible. Similarly, what Thomas Piketty says doesn't necessarily mean that is also coming from the Holy Bible or from the equivalent of that. These are perspectives, and so and of course, reading such books and enriches our perspective. We should read that, but at the same time, you should also read other aspects. Undeniably, there is in our society, we need to actually think about inequality, but at the same time, and as I was saying earlier, before liberalization, we were distributing poverty among ourselves. Okay, now we're actually distributing far more. Yes, that distribution has become more skewed, I undeniably, but just look at the percentage of people that have risen above poverty. In 1990s, the percentage of people that were basically below the poverty line versus today, that percentage has increased, that percentage has decreased significantly. And I think that the evidence shows that very, very clearly. Yes, what has happened is that you actually have some of the other people basically having more wealth. But at the same time, the other point to also remember, when you have an industrialist who, let's say, has some wealth, right? Think about it. Is that person putting that wealth, actually, is that wealth stored as as money, as cash in his under his pillows? No. A lot of that wealth is invested in companies, and that investment, what does that investment do? That investment basically then creates factories, and which provide jobs. So I think to make that point that that wealth is only basically is useless, I don't think that is quite right either, because in any economy without investment you don't get jobs either, and by far the most important way of really uplifting a family is through a job in the formal sector. When one person gets a job in the formal sector, his entire family gets uplifted, and I will tell you, my family is the best example of that. My father actually worked in the Indian Railways, and as a result of that, he actually was able to provide us education. And because he was able to provide us education, our entire family got uplifted. So jobs are by far the most important, and jobs do not come about without investment in the economy. Look at China, for instance. China invested almost 40-odd%, more than 40% of its GDP every year invested. And that's why they've created jobs in millions. They've created so much jobs and thereby created prosperity as well. So I think it is important to keep in mind that yes, you will get some inequality inevitably. And I'll end with this particular, I reckon you are, I think, a professor.
A strong message you have given to the entire student community, that no matter what kind of government is there, a person who is a strong believer of ethics and values has a definite space at the higher level. This is a great message you are leaving with all our students. I'm really very happy to this is because people have different notion about people, that he belongs to this color and that creed, but you have definitely shown that these are the things which matters ultimately, and kindly follow, kindly value these things. Okay, wonderful, excellent.
Thank you so much, Professor Mishra. I just wanted to actually, on this inequality, I want to give, one example, because oftentimes people, we all misunderstand the concept of inequality. Actually, let me use some of, this, because this is a college environment. Let's suppose, suppose, you're teaching a class, you're a professor who's teaching a class. Let's say there are 60 students in that class. Now, if you have two choices, you can say that at the end of the semester, I'll take exams, and let's take two students. Somebody who basically gets 100 out of 100 in the exam, and somebody who basically gets 20 out of 100 in the exam. So there is a lot of inequality. That person who basically got 100, another person has gotten 20. And let's say the professor says that I will take 30 marks from the person who's gotten 100 and give it to the person who's gotten 20, so that the person who's gotten 20 can pass. And this is redistribution. Now think about it. Actually, it's just a thought experiment. What will that do in the class? That person who's actually your brightest student, who would have been working so hard actually to get 100 out of 100, once he or she knows that क्या फायदा मेरा 100 लाने से, actually anyway मैं 100 लाऊंगा या फिर 80 लाऊंगा, मेरे से तो 30 नंबर निकाल के actually दे देंगे. So what it will do, it will actually dull the incentives, and if you basically say, and if you extend this and say that irrespective of how much ever effort you put, whether you pay attention in class or you don't pay attention in class, whether you study your material or not, I'm going to give everybody the same grade. Let's say I'm going to give you all B's. Nobody gets an A, nobody gets a C. That's socialism for you. And there is no inequality in that society at all. It's a very, very equal society. But is it a meritocratic society? Is it a society that actually creates the aspiration for the student to really excel? I think the answer is very clear. No, it does not. Now, let me also take the other side on this one. That when does inequality become a problem? Saying, where suppose you actually say, oh, if the father basically donates so much money, then I'll give an A to a particular student, then that's a problem. That is not meritocratic. And which sometimes can happen actually, where because of the wealth that my father gave me, I actually get to live a let's say very good life. That can create inequality. But I think this point, that there should be no inequality at all, as long as inequality comes from merit. I think from hard work, some of that is actually required. And I think this example illustrates beautifully that if you say that everybody is going to get only B's, you will have a very equal but a completely mediocre society. In contrast, if you actually have that, depending on how hard you work, I will give you some of you A's, and those who don't work hard, basically I'll give you C's or D's, or maybe I might even fail people. That does give incentive for people to work. So I think this is also a very important perspective that all of you keep in mind, actually, when you think about these issues.
Thank you so much, sir. That are all the questions we have. So as we come close to the end of our session, I'd like to extend my vote of thanks to our honorable speaker. Sir, thank you so much for your enlightening words. It was a very delightful and interactive session. I'm sure all of us have gained a lot of perspective and knowledge from it. It was an honor for us to have had the chance to host you, sir. And if I may take the liberty of saying so, I personally am elated to have had the opportunity to speak to you. Also, I would like to thank our respected principal, Sir Dr. S.P. Agarwal, for his unfaltering support in all our endeavors. My deep sense of appreciation and thanks to all the participants who chose to be live with us and attended the seminar with such great enthusiasm. And lastly, my sincere gratitude to all the members of the Finance and Investment Cell who worked endlessly hard to make this happen. This brings us to the end. Thank you so much. Until next time, please take care and stay safe.
Thank you. And